Imagine you have $81 million, not in a vault, not in a safe, just sitting there, encoded in digital signals, moving through copper cables and undersea fiber at the speed of light, crossing 12 time zones in the span of a single Thursday afternoon. Now imagine that money is gone, and no one realizes it until Monday morning. That is exactly what happened in February 2016, when a group of invisible thieves, operating from behind computer screens in a country most Americans would never think to suspect, pulled off what the U.S. Department of Justice later called, quote, the largest successful cyber theft from a financial institution to date. They didn't wear masks, they didn't carry guns, they never set foot inside a bank, and if it hadn't been for a single typo, one misspelled word and 35 fraudulent orders, they would have walked away with nearly $1 billion of a small nation's money. This is the story of the Bangladesh bank heist. To understand what happened, you need to understand SWIFT. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, SWIFT, is essentially the nervous system of global finance. Founded in Belgium in 1973, it's a secure messaging network connecting over 11,000 financial institutions in more than 200 countries. When a bank in Dhaka needs to wire money to a bank in New York, it does it through SWIFT. It's the backbone of international banking, and for decades, it was considered almost untouchable. Almost. Bangladesh Bank is the central bank of a developing nation, one of the most densely populated countries on Earth. And it held the country's foreign exchange reserves in an account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. By 2015, that account held close to $30 billion. But behind the scenes, the bank's cybersecurity infrastructure was frighteningly fragile. According to investigators, Bangladesh Bank's SWIFT terminals were connected to the open internet, with no firewall. Multiple computers shared the same network. There was no separation between the system that handled international wire transfers and the rest of the bank's computers. And the 4 servers connected to SWIFT were, in the words of one analyst, essentially unmonitored. Somewhere in Pyongyang, North Korea, someone noticed. The hackers didn't walk through a front door. They sent an email. In January 2015, more than a year before the heist, employees at Bangladesh Bank began receiving job application emails from a man named Russell Alam. The emails were convincing. Polished cover letters, professional CVs, a link to a personal website to download application documents. It looked like a routine job inquiry. At least one employee clicked the link, and the moment they did, malware embedded in the file silently installed itself onto the bank's computers. According to the FBI's later investigation and a 2018 criminal complaint filed by the U.S. Department of Justice against North Korean programmer Park Jin-hyok, this was the opening move of a plan that had been in development since at least October 2014. The group behind the attack was the Lazarus Group, a state-sponsored hacking collective operating under the direct authority of North Korea's government, specifically its Reconnaissance General Bureau, also known as Bureau 121. Cybersecurity firms, including FireEye, BAE Systems, Symantec, and Kaspersky Lab, independently attributed the Bangladesh attack to Lazarus. U.S. prosecutors would later allege that the group used a front company, the Chosun Expo joint venture, to funnel money and manpower from bases in China. NSA Deputy Director Richard Leggett publicly stated, "If the linkage from the Sony actors to the Bangladesh bank actors is accurate, that means a nation-state is robbing banks." For an entire year, the hackers lived inside Bangladesh Bank's network. They watched. They learned. They mapped every system, every process, every protocol for how SWIFT messages were sent, authenticated, and confirmed. They studied the exact way wire transfer instructions were worded. They learned who reviewed what and when. They observed the bank's holiday schedule, and they noted something crucial. Bangladesh's weekend begins on Friday. New York's weekend begins on Saturday. And the Philippines, where they planned to funnel the money, would be celebrating Chinese New Year in February 2016. 3 time zones, 3 holiday schedules, 1 perfectly timed window. On Thursday, February 4th, 2016, the hackers made their move. Using stolen Swift credentials obtained through keylogger malware that had been silently recording every password typed inside the bank, they sent 35 fraudulent payment orders from Bangladesh Bank's Swift terminal to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. In total, those instructions directed the Fed to transfer $951 million, nearly $1 billion, to accounts in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. The messages looked authentic. They carried Bangladesh Bank's real Swift code. They were formatted correctly. They bore the right credentials. And they arrived in New York on a Thursday afternoon, just as Bangladesh was going dark for the weekend. The Federal Reserve approved 5 of the transfers, releasing $101 million. The money moved at digital speed, but the hackers had also taken one more precaution. Before leaving, they'd installed a second piece of malware designed specifically to cover their tracks. According to BAE Systems Applied Intelligence, this custom-built software targeted the bank's Swift Alliance Access software, the very program used to print logs and records of outgoing messages. It deleted or manipulated those records. It also disabled the physical printer set up to print incoming Swift messages automatically. So when Bangladesh Bank employees came in that Sunday, their first day back, and tried to manually print their Swift records, the printer was dead. The logs were compromised. They had no idea what had been sent in their name 2 days earlier. Meanwhile, in Manila, things were moving fast. In May 2015, months before the attack, the hackers' accomplices had opened 4 bank accounts at a branch of Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, RCBC, on Jupiter Street in Makati City, a busy commercial district in the Philippine capital. The accounts were opened under fictitious names, with fake IDs, and had sat dormant for months. Now, $81 million landed in those accounts. By the time Bangladesh Bank employees returned to work Sunday morning, manually printed their Swift messages, and realized something had gone catastrophically wrong, they tried to contact New York. But it was Saturday in New York. Then they tried to contact RCBC in Manila. The Philippines was closed for Chinese New Year. For 72 critical hours, the money sat unreachable in accounts that technically didn't belong to anyone real, while Bangladesh desperately tried to get someone, anyone, to answer the phone. When the long weekend finally ended and communication lines reopened on Monday, February 8th, Bangladesh Bank sent an urgent Swift message to RCBC: freeze the accounts, stop the transfers, hold the funds. But by that point, $58 million had already been withdrawn, in cash. Funneled through a foreign exchange broker, converted into Philippine pesos, and routed into 2 Manila casinos, Solaire, and a gambling junket operation run by a man named Kim Wong. Casinos in the Philippines, critically, were exempt from the country's Anti-Money Laundering Act. The money was gambled, cashed out, and handed to couriers. It effectively vanished. Only one thing stopped the heist from being a complete historic catastrophe. One word. Among the 35 fraudulent wire transfer requests, one was destined for Sri Lanka, $20 million directed to an organization called the Shalika Foundation. A routing bank, Deutsche Bank, received the transfer and flagged it for review. A sharp-eyed official at Pan Asia Bank in Sri Lanka noticed the transaction seemed too large for a non-profit in a country that size. And then Deutsche Bank's review team spotted something odd in the payment instruction. Where the message should have read "foundation," it said "foundation," a single misspelled word. Deutsche Bank froze the transaction and contacted Bangladesh Bank for clarification. The $20 million destined for Sri Lanka was held and eventually fully recovered. The remaining 30 transfer orders, worth $850 million, were blocked by the Federal Reserve, which had grown suspicious of the large sums being directed to private accounts in Southeast Asia. But by then, $81 million was already gone. Bangladesh Bank Governor Atiur Rahman, one of the country's most respected economists, resigned in March 2016, taking public responsibility for the institution's security failures. He later defended himself by stating he had warned of the bank's cybersecurity vulnerabilities a full year before the attack and had hired an American firm, World Informatics Cybersecurity, to strengthen the bank's defenses. But that bureaucratic delays had prevented the firm from beginning work before the heist occurred. 5 current and former Bangladesh bank officials were found guilty of negligence and exposing the system to outside attack. On August 5, 2016, the Central Bank of the Philippines, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, levied a fine of 1 billion Philippine pesos, roughly $52 million, against RCBC. It was the largest fine the agency had ever issued against any financial institution in the country's history. One RCBC branch manager, Maya Santos de Guito, was later convicted of money laundering, the only person to serve a conviction for the entire heist. Her colleague, a bank officer, testified to Philippine Senate investigators that he had seen de Guito leaving the bank one evening with 20 million pesos in cash piled inside her car. In September 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed a criminal complaint against Park Jin Hyok, a North Korean computer programmer alleged to be a member of the Lazarus group and linked to the Bangladesh heist, the 2014 Sony Pictures hack, and the 2017 WannaCry ransomware attack that paralyzed hospitals, businesses, and government agencies in over 150 countries. Park remains at large. North Korea has denied his existence. In February 2021, 2 additional North Korean operatives, John Chang-hyuk and Kim Il, were indicted by U.S. prosecutors for their alleged roles in a campaign of financial cyber theft, targeting banks and cryptocurrency exchanges across the globe. None of the 3 have ever been arrested. As of 2025, only $15 million of the $81 million stolen from Bangladesh Bank has been recovered. $66 million remains missing, vanished into a chain of shell companies, casino floors, and offshore accounts that investigators have spent nearly a decade trying to untangle. Bangladesh, one of the world's least wealthy nations, has spent years in New York courts attempting to sue RCBC for the return of its funds. In February 2024, the New York Supreme Court allowed the case to proceed on certain grounds, nearly 8 years after the money disappeared. And the Lazarus group? They didn't stop. Using the proceeds of the Bangladesh heist and other operations, North Korea's cyber army has continued targeting banks, cryptocurrency exchanges, and defense contractors worldwide. The United Nations has estimated that North Korea has used cyber theft to raise billions of dollars. Money intelligence analysts believe goes directly toward the regime's missile and nuclear weapons programs. In a very real sense, the money that vanished from Bangladesh Bank's account at the Federal Reserve of New York may have funded a ballistic missile test over the Sea of Japan. That is the world we live in now, where the most dangerous thieves in history carry laptops instead of guns, where a nation-state can loot a developing country's reserves without ever crossing a border, where a billion-dollar heist can be planned over 3 years, executed in 72 hours, and still be, nearly a decade later, almost entirely unsolved. And where the only thing that stood between the world's financial system and a complete catastrophe was a single misspelled word: foundation.